The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Essex for the first time in almost 6 years. It's been ages since I touched this county and I feel that I need to make up for a bit of lost time. We're starting a brand new district here in Essex as well today. This is the beautiful parish of Helions Bumpstead in Braintree. Helions Bumpstead, reedy place belonging to the de Helion family. Right then Essex, it's been a number of years since I was here, so it feels like we need to make up for a bit of lost time. We're here all week, but let's start with where we are today. This is the brilliantly named Helions Bumpstead in the northwest corner of Essex, close to the Suffolk border. The name has a long tale behind it. Bumpstead is thought to come from Old English words meaning reedy place or place by the valley. The Helions part arrived later, taken from the de Helion family. They were Norman landholders who settled here after the conquest. There are 2 Bumpsteads in this area. The other one is a far larger village than this, and we'll see it tomorrow. Both had early farming long before the Domesday Survey, which recorded them as part of a wider estate held by Ralph de Limesey. Defining Helions Bumpstead now is something far younger. Just outside the village is an old airfield. Built during the Second World War, it played a role in training and support work. Parts of it survive as tracks, buildings and open ground, but it's not actually within the parish. We'll cover it in a later episode, but no fear, there's plenty more to spot as we wander around this one, which all adds character. St Andrew's Church is the best, standing on a rise with a tower that can be seen across the fields. The locals know it as the Fairy Tale Church. Work here is always centred on the land. Farming dominated for centuries, and today agriculture still plays a big part, but it's joined by small local businesses, workshops and people who commute to nearby towns. A few well-known names have passed through Helions. One of the most noted was the aviator Claude Graham White, who used the airfield during wartime training. Local records also mention writers, artists and campaigners who led a bit more of a quiet life in the area. Folklore pops up too. There's a brilliant legend about some hidden treasure buried near this one's ancient boundaries, and there's a long-told rumour of a spectral horseman seen on misty evenings near the green. Believe what you will. In recent years, local news has focused on planning issues, road safety concerns, and the upkeep of historic features like the stocks and the green. There have also been discussions about protecting footpaths and wildlife corridors. Helions Bumpstead, therefore, is no different to any average Essex village, but I'll do my best to put this one on the map in its own right. If nothing else, it's a place where the past sits comfortably alongside the present, giving us plenty to look at. Let's get going.
Amelia's Features.
Hello people of Essex. I'm Andy's assistant, Amelia, and this is the first time you've met me. I'm going to be commentating on virtually this whole episode, so I hope I can do it justice. It sounds like a really good one.
Arriving into Helions Bumpstead, before you reach the village you have to pass through the hamlet of Wiggins Green, which is tucked right up near the point where Essex, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire all meet. It feels like a tiny place and a bit nondescript. Well, you would be wrong to assume that. Wiggins Green began as a small farming outpost of the main village, sitting alongside two other small hamlets called Pale Green and Drapers Green. Life here was shaped by farming for a long time, but one of the biggest trades in the area was the production of saffron. Just like the nearby town of Saffron Walden, the land around Wiggins Green was used to grow the crocus plants needed for the bright yellow spice we all know. That was a big deal in medieval and Tudor times, but the trade faded away a long time ago. Wiggins Green also played a part in a major moment in 1914. Farm workers in the parish joined the Agricultural and Rural Workers' Union, and that led to a huge clash with local farmers. When the farmers locked out the Union men, there were torchlight marches and loud gatherings. Amelia will tell you a bit more about that later. The marches took place between Wiggins Green and the main village. Reporters from across the country came to see what was going on. For a small place, it suddenly found itself right in the middle of a national argument. There was once a pub in Wiggins Green. It was called the Pig and Whistle. It served the farm workers and anyone passing through until it closed in 1960. The building is still there, but it's now a private home called Peggy House. The main religious building in Helions Bumpstead is St Andrew's Church, but worship here has a longer backstory. This here is a Plymouth Brethren Gospel Hall on the edge of the village. We can trace its origins back to 1841. That's when a small group of local Christians were drawn to the early Plymouth Brethren movement, which was spreading through Britain at the time, after having originated in Ireland in the 1820s. One of its biggest early gatherings in England was in Plymouth, hence the name. At first, here in Essex, they met in Steeple Bumpstead in a small hall that later became a house, but the group soon grew and looked for a place of its own. By 1886, the Helions Bumpstead Gospel Hall had opened its doors as an independent Open Brethren assembly. And now, Amelia, it's all yours. She's on literally everything else. I'm going to be in some serious trouble.
Well, you know, I like reading. But yeah, you might be. Sleep with one eye open, won't you?
Yes, I will, but you know what, Amelia? People love you. Right, let's go for a walk around Helions Bumpstead.
Helions Bumpstead Village Hall has had quite a journey as buildings go, and it all starts back in 1854, when the building first opened as the village school. Kids from the area came here for lessons for almost 100 years. It didn't quite make its centenary, though. Things changed in 1948 when the school closed. For a while, it looked like the building might be pulled down, which would have been a real loss. But local people stepped in and made sure it stayed standing. They knew it still had plenty of life left in it. After a bit of back and forth, the building was saved, and plans began to turn it into something new. It took a few years, but by 1955, it had officially become the village hall. Over time, it became the sort of place where people popped in for activities, clubs, or just a bit of fun. A huge update came in 2018 when the hall went through a full refurbishment. The work covered both the inside and the outside, and it made a massive difference. More improvements have been made since then. The roof has recently been replaced with new slate. The walls have been repainted, and its old portable stage was taken out to make the main room more open. Today, the hall is run as a charity and can be hired for all sorts of things. It's a building that has been through a lot.
Now, even though I've been to Essex before and done a couple of episodes, it's the first time I've been to Braintree, and because of that, you guys won't know, but I leave one of these cards on parish notice boards when I go to a place. And outside the village hall, we've got a parish council notice board, so we'll do that. There we go. That's Helions Bumpstead done.
St Andrew's Church in Helions Bumpstead is one of those places that looks fairly normal from the outside, but once you step in, it feels like you've walked into something a bit magical. In fact, a lot of people know this as the fairy tale church, and it's deserving of that title. The church goes right back to the 1200s, although the nave is even older, dating from Norman times. Over the years, the building has grown, changed, been knocked about, rebuilt and repaired, but it still stands proudly on its little rise. The tower was added in 1812, as was the porch in 1956. The first thing people notice is the bright white interior. It almost looks like a giant wedding cake. Its look came from a 1930s restorer called C.C. Windmill, who whitewashed the walls and painted the wooden fittings. The result is a space full of light, helped by the huge windows in the south wall. One of the most interesting things inside would be its reused woodwork. When the old medieval screen was destroyed, later carpenters took the broken pieces and used them to build pews and other fittings. If you look closely, you can spot arches that don't quite line up. There are also 2 old wall painting fragments, probably from the 1600s, with text from the Apostles' Creed peeking through the plaster. They're only partly uncovered because taking off the rest of the plaster would risk damaging them. The church also has some brilliant graffiti. Builders, masons, and visitors scratched marks into the stone over the years, including initials, symbols, and even a crossbow carving. Then, there are the Talakan monuments. They are rare wooden memorials with bold colours and unusual designs. One of them is bright pink with painted figures holding up tall obelisks, and another has a cherub with blue eyebrows. In all this is a place full of surprises, and it literally is the stuff of fairy tales.
Okay, so just after the church, you come down a hill, and then you're at this little garden. I guess it's what passes for a village green in this one. Some benches around the edge of it. You can see the church from here as well. Now, if you head to the right, which is what I'm doing here, you come to a former pub. It was called the Marquis of Granby. It's no longer trading now, but it does have a bit of history that we need to talk about.
Let's talk about an old pub next. The Marquis of Granby was once one of the best-known spots in Helions Bumpstead, sitting just north of the main crossroads. It began life in the 16th century and served locals for generations before closing as a pub in 1960. After that, it became a private home. Upon closing, it left behind a long trail of memories, but one especially we need to talk about. It all centred on one very dramatic moment in 1914, the year there was a huge farm workers' strike. It was led by local labourers, who formed a branch of the Agricultural and Rural Workers' Union. The farmers reacted by sacking the union men. This sparked torchlit marches, loud gatherings, and a lot of tension around the village and beyond. Reporters from across the country came to cover the dispute, and it was this pub that became their base. The pub already had a lot of history before that point. Its very name was a clue. It came from Lieutenant General John Manners, the Marquis of Granby. He was the famous military leader from the 1700s, and loads of inns across Britain were named after him. He was loved mainly for his bravery in the 7 Years' War, especially for leading a bold cavalry charge at the Battle of Warburg in 1760. He was also known for helping soldiers who left the army by paying for them to run pubs.
Right, so we've turned around and we've turned right at the crossroads. We've got a bit of a long walk here now down Sage's End Road. This is to get to the moated site which Helions Bumpstead has. It's kind of off this road to the left. Of course, on the way, we've got a few more houses and things to pass by, like these beautiful pair right here. And I'll see you in a moment at the moat.
The next thing for us to cover is a moated site. It sits about 750 metres southwest of St Andrew's Church, tucked away behind some fields and hedges, so we can't see all of it. The site is protected as a scheduled monument. Long ago, this was the site of the medieval manor, and it's where the family that gives this place its name lived. Helions comes from the Helion family, who were given the land here after the Norman conquest. Their manor stood right on the island inside of the moat. The moat itself is large and shaped a bit like a rectangle with one rounded side. It was built to surround the manorial buildings, helping to keep them safe and separate from the farmland around them. The original manor house has not survived into modern times. In the early 19th century, a fire destroyed the medieval building on the island. After that, the site changed hands and slowly moved into a new chapter. Today, the area has a private estate known as Helions Great Hall. One of the reasons the site is still so important is the silt at the bottom of the moat. Because it stays waterlogged, it keeps old materials in surprisingly good condition. Those silt layers can hold seeds, wood, tools, and other remains, acting like a time capsule hidden under the water.
Okay, now we're heading back from whence we came. This footpath we're on now will bring us out at the other pub here in Helions Bumpstead, the one that's actually still open. It's far too early in the morning to get a pint though.
Another pub next. The Three Horseshoes has one of those pasts that feels both homely and dramatic at the same time. It began life in the 1800s as a row of 3 small cottages lived in by labourers who worked next door at the village forge. At some point, someone had the bright idea to turn the cottages into an alehouse, and the name Three Horseshoes was chosen as a nod to both the forge and the work that was done there. For a long time, the pub did well. Things changed in 2012, though, when it was bought by private owners. At first, nothing seemed too worrying, but business slowly dipped, and in 2014, the doors were suddenly shut. The village feared the worst, as pubs that shut like that often never come back. Instead of giving up, residents decided to fight for it. They formed a group called the Helions Bumpstead Community Benefit Society and spent 5 long years trying to buy the pub. It wasn't easy. They had to raise money, deal with legal hurdles and keep the pressure on. But finally, in March 2019, they finally succeeded. The pub was bought using a mix of share offers and government support, and the building was saved from disappearing forever. Since then, it has done incredibly well, and has even won awards for pub preservation.
I hope this isn't true of all Essex natives. Just had a rather bad experience. From the Three Horseshoes, there's a footpath that crosses through some fields. It sort of runs alongside a paddock, and it was quite difficult to actually follow it because there's like a fork in the footpath, which at first glance you think, I'm not quite sure which way to go. Strava helps me out with that kind of thing because it shows you the route of the path. And I'm there looking at my phone, trying to work out which way to go. And this woman came out from a nearby property, basically just gave me an absolute gobful about not following the footpath. I'm like, I'm not being funny, but that's what I'm trying to do. Anyway, I've got away from her. We have now reached the playing field.
Now here's something which you may not initially expect to have such a past to it. We're in the recreation ground just off Mill Road. Back in 1920, the field was bought as a memorial for the 16 men from Helions Bumpstead who lost their lives in the First World War. People in the village raised the money themselves, wanting a place that would stand as a lasting reminder. For a long time, the fact this was a war memorial was known only through old documents. But in 2009, a plaque was added near the village hall entrance to mark its purpose. When the field was first set up, it came with a rather unusual rule. The original deed from 1920 banned organised sport on Sundays. That meant no cricket matches, no football games, no nothing. Over time, though, that rule became a bit of a problem. After some careful work between the parish council and the charity commission, the rule was lifted and Sunday sport was finally allowed. It made life a lot easier for the sports teams who used the field. The recreation ground itself has changed a lot in recent years too. There is now a modern play area for younger children, a BMX track for older kids who like a bit of speed, and a sports pavilion. A picnic area has also been added, which makes the field a nice place to stop for a break on a warm day.
Okay, so we're through the playing field and we are now on a patch of ground which is fairly raised, sort of high up. And the reason that this is important to us is because this patch of raised ground used to have a windmill on it years and years ago. Not anymore. If you look around now, you can see there's absolutely no trace of a windmill anywhere. It's just countryside as far as the eye can see, really. Let's talk a bit about the windmill, shall we? That used to be here.
Finally, let's talk about mills. Helions Bumpstead doesn't have a windmill standing today, but the village once had a long and lively milling past. The earliest record of a mill goes all the way back to 1289, when a medieval post mill was already hard at work. That mill kept going until around 1349, grinding grain for the people who lived nearby. It would have stood on wooden supports, turning with the wind and creaking away through long working days. A new chapter began in 1749, when a tower mill was built on higher ground. Sturdier and tall enough to catch the breeze from all directions, it was important enough to appear on the Chapman and Andre map of 1777. For more than 100 years, it ground grain for the village and the farms around it. It stood in this sort of area where we are now. Like a lot of mills across Essex, it eventually fell out of use and was taken down in around 1900. Local names also keep it alive. Mill Road is the most obvious one, but the mills also pop up in local traditions, including cycle rides and pub events that borrow their names from the old windmills. The milling past of Helions Bumpstead survives mostly through memories, maps, and the odd clue in the fields, but it remains an important part of how the village grew and worked over time. Anyone curious about the mills can still find plenty to read.
Okay, we have made it back to the beginning. It's been a nice walk around Helions Bumpstead. Oh yeah, apart from the one little incident with that woman, but yeah, I'll move on. I'll forget about that. Didn't do anything wrong. That's what annoys me the most about it. I actually did nothing wrong. All I was doing was trying to follow the footpath, and you know, I didn't deserve what I got, frankly. But yeah, never mind. Anyway, yeah, Helions Bumpstead. That's one of the Bumpstead twins down. Another one coming tomorrow. What a great village to return to Essex with. Helions Bumpstead is one of those places where the past sits just under the surface, even when the village looks calm and ordinary at first glance. This was a patchwork of small greens, farms and cottages, with people working the land. The Second World War brought an airfield just outside the village, used for training and support work, and even drew in famous aviators like Claude Graham White. The early 1900s saw huge drama too, when the farm workers' strike of 1914 put this quiet corner of Essex in the headlines. Today, Helions Bumpstead is a mix of old and new. Everywhere you look, something from the past nudges into the present. These chapters are now intrinsically linked, and they all help form the Helions Bumpstead, that old reedy place we know and love today.
My everything. Claude's old flight still hang in the air. Training runs cut through the wartime glare. Names of writers tucked in old rooms, sketching the fields and hedgerow blooms. Footpaths hold tales passed round for years, horsemen in mist and sudden fears. Legends drift where the green sits wide, keeping their place at the village side. Helions Bumpstead rolling on by, old meets new beneath the sky. Voices past and voices near, all of it held in the place right here. Talk in the pub about roads and plans, footpath rows and wildlife spans, keeping the stocks in decent shape, watching the green escape the scrape, planning boards and local chat, sorting this and sorting that, everyday talk with a grounded feel, nothing too grand but always real. Helions Bumpstead rolling on by, old meets new beneath the sky, voices past and voices near, all of it held in the place right here. With me where the fields run long, where past and present both stay strong, airfield tracks and tales still near, all of it part of the village sphere. Step by step the path stays true, carrying old threads into view. Helions Bumpstead rolling on by, old meets new beneath the sky, voices past and voices near, all of it held in the place right here. Helions Bumpstead calm and clear, holding its past without a fear, names and tales in every turn, plenty to see and plenty to learn.
Hello folks, welcome back to Braintree once again. Now we've seen one of the Bumpstead twins. We saw Helions Bumpstead yesterday, and today we're seeing its much bigger twin. This is Steeple Bumpstead. Steeple Bumpstead, church at the Reedy Place. Continuing through Braintree today, we're in Steeple Bumpstead now, which is the second of the two Bumpstead twins. It's far larger than its namely counterpart and has around 1,600 people all living in a mix of old houses and lanes that still feel very rural. The name sounds a bit playful, but we already know what it means. Bumpstead likely comes from the Old English term for a place of reeds beside a river, while steeple grew from a tower that once marked the settlement. Ironically, the church today has no spire at all. This one first appears in a charter from the 1040s, but it was also written in the Domesday Book with a good number of households. Together with Helions Bumpstead, it was seen as all one, but later two Bumpsteads formed. This one picked up links to the Knights Templar. The building that really sticks out here today would be the old Moot Hall on Church Street. Timber-framed, Tudor in style and finished in 1592, it began as a market hall and a school. Today it works as a library and a meeting space, with a war memorial tucked just behind it. St Mary's Parish Church has Norman roots and later medieval work, while the red brick Congregational Chapel carries a tall Victorian spire, unlike the church. There's also a little brick lockup by the churchyard and a well-known footbridge on Church Street. Again, farms shaped life here, but so too did big estates such as Bower Hall and Moynes Park. Later, Colonel J.C. Humphrey, born to a local wheelwright, made his name in this place thanks to corrugated iron, linking this quiet village to a big London industry. For a small place, it has some striking names attached. As well as Humphrey, the famous nurse Edith Cavell, or Cavell, worked here as a governess in the 1880s and is today remembered by plaques and even a road name. In addition, the Bendish baronets of Bower Hall left grand monuments in the church. Stories cling to the fields too. Along Blois Road lies the Bloody Pytle, and that has a grim tale attached to it. It's said to be where a man from Bumpstead was burned for his beliefs. Thankfully, we don't do that sort of thing these days. Right now, Steeple Bumpstead has more pressing concerns, often revolving around housing. A neighbourhood plan running to 2033 has just been adopted after a referendum, guiding the building of new housing and their design. At the same time, water main works and road closures have kept people's patience under pressure. There's always a lot going on in Steeple Bumpstead, it seems, and not all of it is good. That said, I always visit these villages with a positive outlook. Let's get walking.
Amelia's features.
Okay, everybody, this is what I have to cover in the second of the Bumpstead twins. You'll hear me talk about the Moot Hall, the church, Edith Cavell, and J.C. Humphrey. I'll also be talking about the events of 1861.
Right, okay, so here we go. We're walking around Steeple Bumpstead. Now, I've parked on Blois Road. I think that's how you pronounce it, Blois Road. Now, the reason for that is because when we finish this walk, I need to drive down Blois Road because there's a very important landmark up there somewhere. I'm not totally sure where it is. It's in one of the fields, but we'll talk about that at the end. There's plenty more to see in this village, first of all. We're heading down towards a former congregational chapel first. Our first port of call today is Steeple Bumpstead's Congregational Church. This has been part of village life for over 250 years. It has its own small Victorian spire. That's irony for you, because some people reckon the steeple used to be on the Anglican Church. That's debatable though. Even though it's independent and non-denominational, it's always had a strong sense of purpose. This is not surprising. Steeple Bumpstead as a village has always had a long past of standing up for what it believed in, especially when it came to faith. Back in the Tudor period, local people who did not follow the rules of the day sometimes faced trouble for it, as you'll learn later. When this congregational chapel was founded, it offered a space where people could worship freely without pressure from the established church. Next up, we have the Fox and Hounds on Chapel Street. This is one of the oldest buildings the village has. It began life back in the 1500s as a coaching inn, so this has seen plenty of horses, carts and tired travellers in its time. The area around the pub is packed with sister buildings from the 1600s. Because of its age and the way it's held onto its features, the Fox and Hounds is Grade 2 listed. Inside, the pub still has touches from its early days. You'll find a big log burner in the main bar, for example. At the same time, it's been updated so it works well for visitors today. It has front and back gardens that catch the sun, which make them great spots for a drink in the summer. It also has a summer games room with table tennis, darts and retro games. Okay, right next door to the Fox and Hounds, you've got what is potentially Steeple Bumpstead's most defining building. That would be this here, which has been here since the 1500s, I believe. It's called the Moot Hall. Let's talk a bit about this.
So far, we've seen two really impressive old buildings, but neither can hold a candle to this. The Moot Hall on Church Street is one of the oldest and most eye-catching buildings in Steeple Bumpstead. It was first put up in 1592 as a market hall, built with a timber frame in the Tudor style. The wealthy villagers of the time wanted a proper place for trading, and they certainly got one. The front of the building was designed with 3 bays facing down Chapel Street, and the first floor was made bigger by using jettied beams that stuck out a little to create extra room. Back then, the ground floor was totally open, almost like a covered market, until it was boxed in during the 18th century. If you look up at the roof, you will spot something a bit unusual: a lion holding a shield with the royal coat of arms of the Tudor monarchs. In the 19th century, the Moot Hall became the centre of a rather heated argument. George Gent, the lord of the manor at Moynes Park, disagreed with the villagers over who had the right to choose the headmaster for the school that operated inside the building. The whole thing ended up in an ecclesiastical court, which eventually sided with the villagers. The school later moved out in 1848 when a new national school opened further along Church Street. This then became a library and a place for parish meetings, which is still how it's used today. Just behind it stands a simple cross-shaped war memorial, put up in 1920 to honour local people who died in the First World War, unveiled by Colonel Joseph Griffiths, a surgeon who had commanded the 1st Eastern General Hospital in Cambridge during the war.
Okay, got a couple of interesting buildings here. The next thing for us is the church, but I just want to make a mention of these two. We've got an old national school right there. And then directly opposite that, we have the Red Lion with its England flags out because obviously the World Cup's on at the moment. I think this video is going to be out after the World Cup's ended, so I don't know whether or not how far England's going to go in the competition, but they're out at the moment anyway. To the church over here.
Now, we come to St Mary the Virgin's Church, which is a Grade 1 listed building. Parts of it go right back to the 11th century. The walls are made from flint rubble and red brick, and the whole place blends bits of Saxon, Norman, and Tudor design in a way that makes you stop and look twice. It has stood here for over 900 years. The oldest parts of the church are the West Tower and the chancel. In the late 14th and 15th centuries, the nave and the arcades were added, giving the church a bigger and more open feel inside. In the early 1500s, the church had another big makeover. The upper parts of the tower were rebuilt, along with the aisles and the porch, this time using brick. One of the most talked about features from that period is the south aisle ceiling. It has carved tie beams and hanging ridge pendants from the 16th century, and they are so detailed that you could spend ages looking at them. By the time the Victorian era arrived, the church needed some care, so it went through a full restoration in around 1880. Now, despite the village name, the church does not have a steeple. The steeple in Steeple Bumpstead might have been on this church originally, but some people think it belonged to a different building near the Wixow pumping station. We don't know what that was, though.
Now, there's sort of a network of footpaths here that crisscross the churchyard. They seem to go in all directions. One of them leads to the playing field, and that's this one here. Now, this is not just your ordinary playing field, this has got a right story to tell. Okay, so now we're on the playing field, which the locals know as Camping Close. There are no tents here. In this context, camping means something else. The name comes from an old East Anglian word for a rough early form of football. Long before modern football rules were thought up, villagers used this patch of land for that version of the game, as well as for all other sorts of outdoor activities. You'd perhaps think this was just a peaceful spot otherwise, right? Well, if you'd have been here in 1861, it wasn't. Amelia, what happened?
Okay, so this is the story of the Steeple Bumpstead riot, which is perhaps one of the most infamous moments in the village's history. In 1849, a local tenant farmer dug a ditch across part of the Camping Close field to claim a section for himself. The villagers were not impressed, as they believed they had long-standing rights to use the land for games. It took 12 years for something to come of his actions, but it was dramatic. Tempers finally boiled over in 1861. 3 young tradesmen dumped the farmer's manure pile back over the boundary and then returned with about 20 villagers to play football right across it, stamping it into the ground as they went. The 3 men were fined for their actions. However, the case was later overturned at the Court of Queen's Bench, which agreed that the villagers had a reasonable supposition of right to use the land. The court victory fired everyone up even more. It didn't end there. Soon after, a group of villagers knocked down a corn rick on the disputed land, which led to even greater tension. By the summer, things escalated into what newspapers called a riot, with villagers cutting down a hedge and 74 trees from a plantation on the contested ground. When police tried to arrest the ringleaders, they were pushed back by a crowd that refused to let Camping Close be taken from them. Order was restored the next day when the chief constable arrived and persuaded the men to attend court peacefully.
So even with all that drama behind it, Camping Close carried on as a place for gatherings. In 1908 it was used for a huge recruitment meeting for the newly formed 5th Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment, bringing villagers together for a very different purpose. Today, Camping Close is a modern recreation area with plenty to do. It has a fully enclosed playground split into areas for younger and older children, plus a multi-use games area with a refurbished basketball court, outdoor table tennis and a zip wire. Riots? What riots? So you can cross this playing field by using the footpath that comes through the churchyard. It goes onto a housing estate. We're going to take a different path away from this because behind me there you can see we've got the village hall, which is the next thing to talk about. So as we know, Steeple Bumpstead has the Moot Hall, which is an important communal building now. However, it does have a standard village hall too, run by a charitable trust. This sort of gets overlooked a bit because it's the Moot Hall that tends to catch people's attention first. The modern village hall has its own place in village life too. The trust was set up in 1933 to run it with the aim of offering space for recreation and learning. The trust's rules were updated in the late 1990s and the hall continues to host clubs and classes for people of all ages. Now we've wandered into a housing estate, which on the face of it looks a bit uninspiring. However, we're on a street called Edith Cavell Way, and that's a name which is far from boring. This remembers one of the village's greatest wartime heroines.
Edith Cavell is remembered all over the world for her bravery in the First World War, but long before any of that, she spent a year living in Steeple Bumpstead. In 1886, she worked as a nursery governess for the 4 children of the village vicar, Reverend Charles Powell. She stayed at the old vicarage on the corner of Chapel Street and Finchingfield Road, which is now a private home. A stone plaque on the wall there still marks the spot where she once lived, reminding visitors that this quiet corner of Essex played a small part in her early life. During her time in the village, Edith was known for being energetic and kind. Locals remembered her joining in with dancing, tennis, and other simple pastimes. She was the sort of person who threw herself into whatever was happening, and people warmed to her straight away. Even though she was only in the village for a short time, she left a strong impression on those who met her. Steeple Bumpstead has never forgotten her. In the church, for example, there's a plaque dedicated to her life and courage. After leaving Steeple Bumpstead, Edith went on to work as a governess in Belgium before returning to England to train as a nurse. She later became a key figure in modern nursing, known for her skill, compassion, and strong sense of duty. When the First World War broke out, she found herself in German-occupied Belgium, where she helped more than 200 Allied soldiers escape to safety. She knew the risks but carried on anyway, believing it was the right thing to do. Rightly or wrongly, she paid for it with her life. In 1915, Edith Cavell was executed by a firing squad for helping those soldiers. Her final words have since become famous around the world. They were, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone."
Okay, so if you walk along Edith Cavell Way, you'll eventually come to a street on the left-hand side called George Gent Close. He's another famous figure that was linked with Steeple Bumpstead. And at the end of that, you can see we have this track here. Now this leads to Bower Hall.
Off the estate with Edith Cavell Way on it, you can see the site of Bower Hall. It was, when it was here, once one of the grandest places Steeple Bumpstead has ever had. For hundreds of years it was the home of the Bendish family, who were known across Essex for their wealth and influence. The hall was large, impressive, and full of history. The Bendish family played a huge part in shaping the hall's reputation. One of the most famous members was Sir Thomas Bendish, a baronet who supported King Charles I during the English Civil War. Because of that loyalty, he ended up having his estate seized and was even locked up in the Tower of London. By the early 1900s, Bower Hall was no longer the grand house it once had been. During the First World War, it was used as a concentration camp, and the building fell into serious decline. In 1926, the hall was demolished, bringing an end to a place that had stood for hundreds of years. One of its most impressive features, a huge carved staircase, was taken to the United States, where it still survives today. Here in Steeple Bumpstead, there are a couple of remaining features, such as a long avenue of tall trees, that still mark the old approach to the house. A six-sided brick dovecote from around 1700 also survives and can still be seen on the site too.
Right, it's got a long walk to do now, basically back up to the northern end of Steeple Bumpstead. Quite a few things to catch along the way, including this school. Steeple Bumpstead Primary School next. This has moved around quite a bit before finally settling at its current site on Bower Hall Drive in 1972, when new purpose-built classrooms were opened. Before that, lessons had taken place in different buildings across the village. The school goes back to 1592, when it was set up inside the Moot Hall. Records from the 1830s and 1870s mention both national and British schools being supported here, which suggests there were different approaches to teaching after the Moot Hall days. For a time, this one was renamed the Stanley Drapkin Primary School in honour of a World War II veteran, a local postmaster and a long-serving school governor. He'd supported the school for more than 35 years. This is now an academy within the Unity Schools partnership. Next, we come to the Steeple Bumpstead Telephone Exchange on North Street. This began life in 1933 as a tiny rural automatic exchange with just 17 lines. Back then, it served Steeple Bumpstead, Helions Bumpstead and Birdbrook, and the whole system ran on early Stroger equipment. For decades, the exchange worked on the original RAX5 Stroger unit, which was the standard for rural areas at the time. It relied on mechanical switches clicking away to connect calls, and although it seems old-fashioned now, it was cutting edge in the 1930s. The exchange kept this setup until around 1989, when it finally moved over to System X digital working. The next big leap came in December 2003, when ADSL broadband was switched on. It was a huge upgrade for local residents, especially as online services were becoming more important at the time. Steeple Stores and Westrope Motors sit at number 41 North Street. This is a business that's still run by the Westrope family, who have been involved with cars and local trade for decades. The motor side of the business officially began in 1982 when Westrope Motors was incorporated as a company. From that point on, the workshop and car sales became well known in the area. Ian Westrope, one of the key figures behind the business, has even been mentioned in automotive features for keeping to old-fashioned trust-based customer service. Steeple Stores acts as the village's main convenience shop. It stocks everyday groceries, fresh produce and bits and pieces that save locals from having to travel further afield. It's a handy stop for drivers from nearby villages too, like Hempstead and Radwinter. Couple of interesting buildings here, one that's still in use and the other one that definitely isn't. Here's the one that isn't. Look at this, very overgrown house. Can I see the name of this place? There's a nameplate above the door. Can I read what it says? No, I can't, it's too covered in ivy, but you can tell nobody lives there. There's no window in the top window there, is there? No glass in it. It's a bit of a shame, that, quite frankly. Anyway, next door, this building is very much still in use. Let's see what it says. It says British School on that gable end there. Obviously not a school now. Clearly a dwelling of some kind.
So, in walking along North Street from end to end, we've passed the site of a unique house that was demolished in the 1960s. It was called the Iron House, and it was lived in by Colonel J.C. Humphrey. He was one of the most interesting figures to come out of Steeple Bumpstead. He was born in the village as the son of the local wheelwright, so his early life was very ordinary. But he didn't stay local for long. As he grew older, he moved into manufacturing work in London and eventually became a major industrialist. He founded Humphreys Limited, a company based in Knightsbridge that became famous around the world. The firm specialised in portable iron and wooden buildings, which were used in all sorts of places, from overseas colonies to military sites. The company grew so large that it claimed to be one of the biggest of its kind, and it even held a royal warrant as a supplier to King Edward VII. For a man who started life in a small Essex village, this was a huge achievement. Back in Steeple Bumpstead, Humphrey built himself the house that matched his industrial success. The iron house was made using his own pre-fabricated iron techniques, almost like a giant demonstration model of what his company could do. It must have looked very unusual. Over the years, a local rumour grew that Colonel Humphrey had invented corrugated iron. It's a good tale, but it isn't true. Corrugated iron was actually patented in 1829 by Henry Robinson Palmer, long before Humphrey's company became famous. What Humphrey did do, however, was help make prefabricated iron buildings far more popular and widely used, which is probably why the rumour stuck. It's still not a bad rise for the son of a wheelwright, becoming a wealthy industrialist. It's the sort of tale that sticks in people's minds.
Right, we're almost at the end of the walk now. We're just passing North Crescent, which is a very nice street actually. Look at this. Looks beautiful in the sunshine. It's even got its own play area, look. It's handy, isn't it? So, in a few steps' time, we'll be taking a footpath off to the right, and that will take us back to Blois Road. And you remember at the beginning of this video, I said I parked there purposely so that I could cover something on Blois Road on the way out. And that something is the Bloody Pytle. Okay, so to finish with, we have to cover the Bloody Pytle. It's a field, believe it or not, but it's one of the most talked about fields in the country, not just in Steeple Bumpstead. It sits somewhere along Blois Road on the way to Birdbrook, and I couldn't nail down exactly which one. The exact field is sort of irrelevant anyway, it's what happened in it that is. Its name sounds dramatic, and there's a reason for that. Long ago, during a time of harsh religious persecution, a local man was burned at the stake there for refusing to give up his beliefs. The word pytle itself is an Old English term. It simply means a small enclosed piece of land, usually a little patch next to a house or a farm. You find lots of pytles in Norfolk, for example. Lots of villages in Essex once had pytles, but Steeple Bumpstead is probably the only famous one. So who was the man who was burned? Well, it was John Theobald, and this is what happened. As we know, Steeple Bumpstead as a village has a long past linked to religious tension, especially in the 16th century. In 1527, some 9 local residents were taken before the Bishop of London for meeting in secret to pray and read the New Testament. The villagers were accused of going against the rules of the time, even though they were simply gathering to read and pray together. The secret meetings often took place at Bower Hall, the home of the Bendish family. The Bendish family were influential and tried to protect the villagers, but even their support couldn't stop the harsh punishments that followed. They all suffered greatly for their beliefs, but Theobald came off the worst. Today, the Bloody Pytle looks like an ordinary field, but it stands as a reminder of the people who lived in Steeple Bumpstead long before us, and of the risks they took to follow their faith. And if nothing else, that's the enduring image that should be left with you as we drive away from this one. Steeple Bumpsteaders have always tried to look after themselves, with mixed results it maybe has to be said. Nonetheless, this is a village that's proud of itself and its historic happenings. We don't have anyone burned at the stake these days though. Instead, we have a lovely Essex village that knows what it is and what it isn't. I think it's fabulous myself.
Steeple Bumpstead has 3 things that make it famous. Here they all are in a song. J.C. Humphrey! He worked with grit in a small Essex yard, shaping bright metal that travelled so far. A bold local maker with plans in his mind, turning sharp sheets into something refined. Old parts still carry the marks of the past. Names linger on while the seasons move fast. Edith Cable! Long before war placed her name in the light, she walked these tracks in the cool morning bright. Her courage grew firm in each passing year, a nurse with a will that held clear. Some tales sit close in the fields and the air. Threads of old life still hang everywhere. The Bloody Pytle! A patch of ground with a name cut in fear, linked with a soul who paid dear. Fires once burned on that grim little rise, marking a stand that still stirs the wise. Humphrey with metal that carried his name, Cable with courage that lifted her fame. A field with a tale that still chills the breeze, 3 threads that sit in the hedgerow trees. Humphrey with metal that carried his name, Cable with courage that lifted her fame. A field with a tale that still chills the breeze, 3 threads that sit in the hedgerow trees.
Hello folks, welcome back to Braintree in Essex. Now today I brought you to a place that's famous as being the birthplace of a type of apple. Have you ever heard of a Sturmer pippin? It comes from the parish of Sturmer. Sturmer, Store Lake. Okay, next up here in Braintree, we're visiting the village of Sturmer, just a short hop southeast of Haverhill and close to the Suffolk border. This is a small one, which is mostly fields and lanes near the waters of the River Store. It's a very easygoing sort of place. The name has watery roots. Early records call it Store Mere, basically meaning the lake or the pool of the River Store. Over time, that squeezed down into Sturmer. Once you know that, the ponds, streams and damp meadows around the village suddenly make a lot more sense. Sturmer has a few ancient features. The biggest one is a burial mound west of the village, dating from the Neolithic to the Late Bronze Age. People reckon buried inside it is one of Boudicca's generals, but that's never been proven. Sturmer Hall, next to the church, is another ancient site to speak of. It began as a moated manorial site, later becoming a big farming house with gardens and outbuildings. It now works as a hotel, conference venue and wedding spot, drawing visitors from well beyond the village. This one has an ancient literary link too. Sturmer appears in the Battle of Maldon poem, written in around the year 1000. Since then it's appeared in the Domesday Book, where it was recorded with a manor, a mill and that mere, and it stayed occupied ever since. Big farms around Sturmer Hall once grew wheat, barley and oats, with maltsters and farmers listed in 19th century directories. Today, jobs lean more towards small local firms, hospitality at the Sturmer Hall Hotel, and commuting to Haverhill and beyond. For a small place, Sturmer has some memorable names. The Battle of Maldon poem gives us one for a start, Leif Sunu. In the poem, he proudly says he's from Sturmer, and a modern plaque to him sits in the church. He's not the only famous man to have lived here. In the 19th century, Ezekiel Dilliston raised the Sturmer pippin apple here, and he's remembered today via a street with his name. Of course, you can't forget whoever's buried in the mound, but we don't know who that is. Sturmer feels like a place where history and story keep nudging each other. Right now, stories tend to circle around familiar village themes like new building proposals and looking after the river, the mere and the wildlife areas. Walking into Sturmer means stepping into a place that has seen a lot. How many Essex villages can claim they were mentioned in a Saxon poem, founded an apple, and have a burial mound where one of Boudicca's warriors might lie? Only one, and that's Sturmer.
Hello folks, this is what I've got on my agenda today. Have you ever tried a Sturmer pippin apple? I haven't, so I'm going to be quite keen to cover that. I'll be on the burial mound and the golf club too, and the old station.
Okay, so our start point in this one is actually right on the border between Sturmer and Haverhill. And on the border you'll find this roundabout, which is quiet at the moment, but I imagine at peak times this is quite busy. Now, right on this roundabout, there's a burial mound. It's behind these hedges. Now, whether or not I'm going to be able to see this, I don't know, because I've just had a walk along the footpath that's at the edge of this, on the edge of the road, and I can't really see anything. So hopefully I'll find a gap in the trees and you'll be able to see the mound. It's quite an important thing to Sturmer, this.
Let's get things started with that burial mound. which is right at the western end of the parish boundary, almost in Suffolk. This certainly grabs your attention once you know what it is. This mound is an ancient bowl barrow, and it's pretty large too, stretching almost 50 metres across. The barrow is incredibly old. Archaeologists think it was first built somewhere between the Neolithic and Late Bronze Age. It was originally a bit taller. Over time, farming and ploughing pushed the mound down a bit, and the soil has sunk in places. Of course, a place this old is bound to have a few tales attached to it. One favourite local tale says the mound holds the remains of one of Queen Boudicca's generals from the Great Rebellion against the Romans in 60 AD. No one can prove it though. Some historians have wondered if the mound might have been reused or robbed during Roman times, especially since Roman roads and villas once stood not far away in the Stour Valley. No one knows for sure, and that mystery is part of the fun. If you want to visit the barrow today, it's not hard. You can follow public footpaths that run off the A1307 Sturmer Road. The paths link up with the Stour Valley Path, which is a pleasant walk in its own right.
Quite impressed with myself there, because I had to basically fight my way through some thistles and nettles to get to that gap in the hedge so you could see that. Hope you appreciate that one, people.
Something else that's up here in this northern portion of Sturmer is Haverhill Golf Club, which sits on what used to be simple farmland. Today, it has a full 18-hole parkland course, but the place has a much longer past than you might expect. Long before the modern club opened, golfers were already swinging their clubs in this part of Essex. Back in the early 1900s, a separate club called the Haverhill and District Golf Club played on the grounds of Sturmer Hall. It had a 9-hole course and a lively set of competitions. That early club slowly faded away after the death of its main supporter, John Peter Hoffman, in 1925. Once he was gone, the course slipped off maps and out of local papers, and before long it was only remembered by older villagers. For decades after that, golf in the area went quiet. But by the late 1960s, Haverhill was growing fast, and people began talking about bringing golf back to the town. This time, the plan was to build something new, rather than revive the old Sturmer Hall course. This modern club finally took shape in the 1970s. The first 9 holes were designed with help from Charles Laurie, a former Walker Cup captain. The land chosen for the course was farmland cut through by the Stour Brook, which made things interesting for golfers right from the start. When the course opened in the summer of 1976, it was run as a municipal pay-and-play setup, so anyone could turn up and have a go. It was simple, friendly, and busy from day one. But the council's management didn't always keep golfers happy. Drainage problems and the constant use of temporary tees annoyed the regulars, and eventually the members stepped in and took over running the place themselves. Once they were in charge, the club began to grow. The biggest change came when architect Philip Pilgrim designed the Inward 9, turning the course into the full 18-hole layout that players know today. Now, the club covers just under 100 acres and measures a little over 6,000 yards. It plays as a par 70 and has a very compact feel.
Okay, so now we're in the village and it's time for a walk. Our start point is a little street by the name of Dilliston Court. This is a reference to a guy who founded a type of apple, the Sturmer pippin. For this, we have to go back to the early 1800s. A nurseryman named Ezekiel Dilliston planted seeds in the garden of the rectory house. One of those seeds grew into an apple that turned out to be something special. It was tasty, but also tough enough to last through the cold months without going soft or losing its bite. Dilliston believed the apple came from a mix of 2 older types, the Ribston pippin and the nonpareil. Whatever the mix was, it worked. By 1827, he was confident enough to take the apple to the Royal Horticultural Society, where it caught attention straight away. Tell us more, Amelia.
So, a few years later, in 1831, it was officially introduced to the public. From that point on, the Sturmer pippin began to spread far beyond the village where it first grew. The apple's biggest leap came thanks to Dillerstone's grandson, who moved to Australia and took cuttings with him. The tree loved the climate there, and it also thrived in New Zealand. Because the fruit stayed crisp for months, it became perfect for long sea journeys. By the 1890s, ships were carrying crates of Sturma pippins from the southern hemisphere all the way back to the UK. As for the apple itself, it has a bold personality. It's medium-sized, with green skin that can turn yellow or orange as it ripens, and sometimes it has patches of russeting that make it look a bit rustic. People still grow the Sturma pippin today, especially those who like apples with a bit of character. When you bite into it straight after picking, it can be quite sharp. It's not a gentle sharpness either. It's more like a, wow, that woke me up sort of sharp. Kids either love that or they pull a face. You know the one I'm on about. By January or February, it tastes almost like a grown-up version of a Granny Smith, with a deeper, fuller flavour that hangs around on your tongue. It's also a brilliant cooking apple because it keeps its shape in the pan instead of turning into mush. People love it for pies and tarts. Even the tree itself has a bit of personality. It's known for being tough, hard-working and reliable. Gardeners like it because the apples hang on the branches well into late autumn. If you ever get the chance to try one, it's worth it. It's the kind of apple that's best enjoyed at just the right moment.
I don't know whether we're going to spot any apple trees around here with Sturma pippins growing on them, but I know one thing for sure, we will be seeing a lot of this. This here is an old railway line, and it runs down to basically what is the centre of Sturma. This part of it has been turned into a very nice trail. There are sections of this that you can't actually walk on, but we'll cover those in future episodes. This one you can, and it's going to provide the backdrop to this next section. Now we're on what is the track bed of an old railway line which flanks the village to the north. From 1865 right up until 1967, Sturma had its own little station on this old line, which was part of the Store Valley Railway. It sat on the line between Sudbury and Cambridge. The track here was lifted in the 1960s, but the village didn't let the route of the railway fade away completely. In 1978, the parish council bought the disused trackbed and turned it into a public walking trail, which is handy for us. So let's go down it and find the station. So we've walked the length of that stretch of the old railway line. There's a board here which tells you something about the Sturma Steps, the Sturma Steps Heritage Trail. And on there you can see we have a picture of the old railway station that this place used to have. Now that is somewhere in that direction.
Sturma Station opened on the 9th of August 1865 and was first run by the Great Eastern Railway. Later on it passed to the London and North Eastern Railway and eventually to British Railways. Trains stopped here to pick up passengers, but the station was especially handy for local growers. Early morning milk trains carried violets, chrysanthemums, tomatoes and other produce straight to London, long before supermarkets existed. For a rural spot, it was surprisingly busy at certain times of year. The station itself had a simple layout. There was just the one platform. The main building was a square, two-storey brick house with a slate roof, and a smaller wing stuck out from one side. Inside you would have found the station master's home, a booking office, and a waiting room. Off to one side was a small goods yard, with a single siding. That was later extended to form a passing loop, although a second platform was never added. Everything changed in 1967, when the beaching cuts swept through the region. For a while the site sat unused, with the trackbed slowly becoming overgrown before it was redeveloped. Today, the station building is a private home. The brickwork has been pebble-dashed and the windows replaced, but the shape of the building is still easy to recognise if you know what you're looking for. Best of all, the original platform is still there.
So also on the route of the old railway line, got a little play area going on now. Let's check that out. Not far away from the station, you'll come across the Pocket Park, which is where the village playground sits today. It's a bright little spot with swings, slides and space to run around. Kids use it all the time now, but it hasn't always looked like this. Back in 2018, the parish council managed to secure funding from the Tesco grant scheme, and that money helped bring in fresh equipment and a much nicer layout. Before that, the play area was pretty tired, so the upgrade made a big difference. This park is the starting point for something called the Sturmer Steps Heritage Trail. Basically, it's a walking route around the village with information boards that tell you about local history, wildlife and the River Store. And speaking of the store, this here is not the river, but it does drain into it. You're looking at the Store Brook, which is the very watercourse that runs across the golf club to the north, helping to define its features. It gently makes its way under the road here, which is called Water Lane, an apt choice. Next we have the Village Hall. This building first opened in 1877, not as a hall but as the village's board school. When that closed in 1962 it was turned into the Village Hall and it's now looked after by a group of trustees known as the Village Hall Charity Committee. One of the biggest moments in its long life came when the building reached its 150th anniversary. The village marked the occasion with displays, old photographs and even a reenactment of a Victorian classroom. To the War Memorial now, a tall granite cross set back from the pavement, just a short distance from the village hall. It stands behind a small hedge with a bench nearby so people can sit for a moment and think about those who never came home. Already in place by February 1921, 11 names are carved into the stone, each one belonging to a man from the village who died. After the Second World War, the memorial was updated again. A plaque was added to the base to honour those who died between 1939 and 1945. In recent years, the memorial needed some attention. Thanks to funding from Hopkins Homes and support from the War Memorials Trust, repairs were carried out. The cross was strengthened, cleaned and made safe again. Right, we've found our way to Sturmer's only pub. It's called the Red Lion.
Pubs-wise, Sturmer only has the one. But boy, this is quite the inn. This is one of the older buildings of the village and it's grade 2 listed to boot. Once you know its past, it's easy to see why it matters so much. The building goes back to the 14th and 15th centuries, long before proper roads. It began life as a row of domestic houses, each one with its own odd ceiling height and sloping floor. For a long time, these houses were simply homes. It wasn't until the 19th century that the 3 medieval dwellings were joined together and turned into the Red Lion. One of the most interesting things about the Red Lion is its link to the Sturmer-Pippin apple. The pub sits right beside the former Dillystone nurseries, where the famous apple was first grown in the early 1800s. Ezekiel Dillystone himself lived and worked just next door. So, while people were enjoying a drink inside the pub, the orchards beside it were producing an apple that would one day be known across the world. Over the years, the Red Lion has appeared in all sorts of records. One surviving document is an auction notice from January 2003. With its thatched roof, old beams, and medieval layout, it feels like a piece of history you can walk straight into. Whether you're interested in old buildings, local orchards, or just the feel of a place that has seen hundreds of years of village life, the Red Lion is the place to be.
Okay, now we're on a footpath which is directly opposite the Red Lion. This will take us down towards the church and also Sturmer Hall. It's not very far down here, but if I just show you what I can see, it looks like I'm heading into the middle of nowhere, but trust me, they are down here. And then when we've been to them, there's a road which is over there somewhere, which is the vehicular access to both those things. We'll come back up there to a garden centre, and that's pretty much it. Now we've reached Sturmer Hall, which stands on a partially moated site. That already tells you it's old, but its past goes back even further than you might expect. This house has been in the hands of a lot of different owners. One of the known residents was Robert Todd, who held the estate in 1550. By the 1890s, the estate was a busy agricultural and sporting property, with fields and space for outdoor pursuits. Oh, and the orchards, of course, can't forget them. In 1966, it settled into life as a private residential farm. Everything changed again in 1979 when the hall was transformed into a commercial venue. For decades it ran as a hotel, a conference centre, a music venue and a wedding destination. More recently, there have been applications to turn the manor into a special educational needs school. Certainly a little less noisy in this part of Sturmer because we're nowhere near the main road, we're a long way back from it. And that sort of adds to the ambience around Sturmer Hall and this church as well. And this is beautiful, let me tell you.
Now we're at St Mary's Church, which sits close to Sturmer Hall. This is a Grade 1 listed building. Parts of it go right back to the 9th and 10th centuries, but the oldest complete part of the church is the nave, built in the early 11th century. If you step inside, you can still see a tiny Saxon doorway, only 71 centimetres wide. It has simple carvings above it. You can imagine people squeezing through that doorway nearly 1,000 years ago, wearing clothes and carrying objects that would look strange to us today. In the 12th century, the Normans added their own touches. The chancel dates from that period, along with the south doorway, which has a bold chevron arch. Later on, in the 14th century, the western tower was built, giving the church its tall outline. The nave also gained a double hammer beam roof. which is one of the most impressive features inside the building now. The Tudor period brought even more changes. In the early 1500s, a red brick porch was added to the front of the church, which fits in surprisingly well. Inside and outside, you'll find memorials to people who played important roles in village life. One of the most interesting is a plaque for Reverend William Hicks, who served as rector for more than 40 years and fought as a midshipman at the Battle of Trafalgar when he was young.
Right, just the garden centre left, and you make your way to that from the church by heading down this road. Like I said, it's all gravel, and I hate the sound of gravel crunching under my feet. It's one of those things that I just totally abhor for some reason. I don't know why, but yeah, garden centre, last stop around Sturmer.
And finally, we come to Sturmer Garden Centre, just up the lane from the church. As we know already, Sturmer is pretty famous for growing stuff, and this is sort of a modern version of that. This site covers 2.76 acres and began life in 1982 as Sturmer Nurseries. Back then, it was a simple family business run by Howard and Marilyn Clutton, who had already been running Horseheath Garden Supplies. What started as a straightforward nursery slowly grew into a place where people came for plants, tools, and a friendly chat. When Howard and Marilyn stepped back, their son-in-law Robert Mason and his wife Samantha took over. One of the biggest changes came in 2014, when they invested in a smart, architect-designed building that became a new shop and a bistro. Suddenly, the garden centre was thriving. In September 2024, after 42 years of hard work in total, the Masons decided it was time to retire. They sold the business to Angela and Flavio Andrea, newcomers to the industry. But the spring of 2025 brought a tough challenge. Supply chain problems meant the garden centre couldn't get hold of key products during the busiest part of the year. In 2026, the situation had become too difficult to manage, and so the centre went up for sale recently. The asking price was £2 million.
There's a milepost here, just up from the garden centre. We'll just have a look at this before we get back in the car. There you go, you can see it, the old spelling of Sturmer here, look, Sturmia, with the E on the end. We don't use that anymore. 27 miles from Colchester, 14 to Halstead, and I'm assuming that Haverhill is supposed to be here, but it doesn't say it, just one mile. Haverhill is in that direction, and 1 mile sounds about right. Amelia, are you all right? You've covered a lot so far this week.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'll keep going until I can go no more, and I'm not even halfway there yet.
Okay, good, because tomorrow things are going to get way more interesting. If you're a fan of James Bond, the next video in the Braintree series is definitely for you. See you down the road, where we'll learn a bit about From Russia with Love.
By the orchards I walk, where the old roots cling, where Dilla stone grafted that bright green king. A crisp little jewel with a sharp clean bite, born by the mere in the cool dawn light. It grew by the mill where the water would churn, a prize of the soil with a bold firm burn. Carried by carts through the market's call, a fruit with a snap that could rouse us all. Its skin, I think of the craft that lived within. I think of the pride that the growers knew. I think of the work each year, a sign that the past still lingers here. Sturmer, Pippin, bold and bright, sharp as frost and sweet as night. Hold it high and taste that spark. Made in fields where legends mark. And let's not forget Boudica's General. I stride through the mist with my spear held tight. I claim this ground with my warrior might. I call on the land that the growers tend. I guard their craft as their ancient friend. Sturmer, Pippin, bold and bright, sharp as frost and sweet as night. Hold it high and taste that spark. Made in fields where legends mark. Sturmer, Pippin, bold and bright, sharp as frost and sweet as night. Hold it high and taste that spark. Made in fields where legends mark. So walk by the trees where the apples gleam, where past and present share the same dream. Take one fruit and lift it high. Sturmer's pride will never die.
Hello folks, welcome back to Braintree in Essex once again. Now, the first three you've seen in this series have all been right on the border between Essex and Suffolk. We're now starting to head deeper into the Essex countryside, and that means there are more tales to tell, and there's even a bit more history to look at as well. And behind me you can see part of that history. If you're a James Bond fan, you may know this place. That's Moynes Park. You'll find it in Birdbrook. Birdbrook. Right, here's a really interesting little village that has some rather big connections to some well-known films. Birdbrook is located a few miles from Haverhill, close to the Essex-Suffolk border. It sits on a raised piece of land which is relatively high for this part of the world. Birdbrook literally means bird brook. It's as simple as that. Old writers linked it to the brook running through the parish, and the records spell it every which way, including Bridebrook, Brodebrook, Birdbrook, and even Bridebro in the Domesday Book. That Domesday entry reminds us that this has been farmland for a very long time, with villagers, smallholders and even slaves working plough teams, meadows and woodland for pigs and sheep. It still leans on arable fields and pasture, though a bit less than it used to. The one place that really pins Birdbrook on the map now is Moynes Park. It's a big Elizabethan house just outside the village. Grade 1 listed, it was once home to the Gent family and later Ivar Bryce. It later gained fame through Hammer films and the visits of Ian Fleming. From Moynes Park, it's only a short wander back to the heart of the village, where other landmarks sit close together. St Augustine's Church stands beside the pub, called the Plough, while Baythorn Hall and Baythorn Park lie nearby. All of these places grew out of work on the land. For centuries, farms and estates like Moynes Park and Baythorn provided most of the jobs, from labourers to house staff. These days, people still farm, but many commute, while the pub, small local firms and the occasional estate enterprises pick up the slack. The names tied to Birdbrook are surprisingly big. Thomas Gent of Moynes Park sat in Parliament in Tudor times, whilst Ian Fleming is said to have finished the James Bond film From Russia With Love here. Even Burl Ives once sang at a fete. As you can imagine, the connection to Fleming, and indeed to James Bond, does get the locals talking, but there are other tales to tell. For example, some winters around here were cold enough for skating on the inner moat at Moynes Park. Here's a better known tale. In St Augustine's Church you'll find a plaque that commemorates one Martha Blewett who somehow managed to outlive 8 of her 9 husbands. The church also has a doorway head carved to look like Winston Churchill. The village still writes its own story now. Things still happen and people keep talking. When we set off to walk Birdbrook, we're not just ticking off a pretty church and a big house. We're here to tell a few tales and recall old newspaper headlines from the depths of our minds.
Birdbrook might be small, but I still have a lot to do in this episode. Most of it revolves around 007, James Bond himself. I'll be telling you about his connection to Moynes Park via his creator, Ian Fleming.
Let's get started with the hamlet of New England to the north of Birdbrook Village. I'm going to be straight with you here. I found nothing for this because, as you can well imagine, if you type New England into Google, which is an American company, you get more than a few Americanisms. I'll see you in the village. Our first stop in the village is Birdbrook Bowls Club. This has its beginnings in the early 1960s, but the tale really starts a little earlier with Mr. and Mrs. John Bryce of Moynes Park. They were well known for helping the village in all sorts of practical ways. One of their biggest ideas was to set up the Bryce Foundation. Thanks to their support, a new thatched building called the Community House was put up on the street. We'll see that in a moment. By 1961, the Bryce Foundation had funded a full-size bowling green behind that centre. The club was officially formed in January that year. During the 1970s, it joined the English Bowling Association, which opened the door to bigger matches and tougher opponents. By 1975, the club had joined the Steeple Bumpstead League. Birdbrook didn't just take part in it, they helped run it. So this is the Birdbrook Community House, which sits directly opposite the village pond. Although it was put up in 1958, it looks far older because it was purposely designed to look like a traditional North Essex building. Before this came along, there was something else here. This is the exact same spot where the old school once stood. In keeping with the North Essex style, it has pargeted walls and a reed thatched roof that make it look like it belongs. It isn't fancy or over the top, but it has a warm, old-fashioned look that people tend to like. The thatch in particular makes it stand out, especially when the sun catches it. Inside, the house has a big function room that can be used for all sorts of gatherings, plus a smaller reading room and a proper kitchen. Out the front, there's a rose garden that adds a splash of colour. I don't think you're going to get much nicer start than that in any village, quite frankly. The community house is absolutely fantastic, isn't it? But then again, so is Birdbrook. It's one of those villages that when you drive into it and walk around it, you're just amazed by how beautiful it is. Now, the next thing on our list is the Plough, which is a pub. It's just up here.
This here is the local pub. It's called the Plough. Before it became what it is today, the building was known as the Old House, and it had already lived quite a life. Back in the 1700s, it was a single cottage that had been split into two smaller places. We know this because that fact was written in a will dating from the 18th of July, 1737. No one is quite sure whose will it was, though. By the mid-1800s, a man named Charles Ralling owned it, and his name appears in both the Post Office Directory and Kelly's Directory from 1845. The name, the Plough, seems to have arrived a little later. The deeds show that the building took on its pub name in 1889, most likely when Ralling's niece Harriet Blacklock became the owner. From that point on, it wasn't just a house anymore. It was a proper village pub. Harriet Blacklock eventually sold it in 1911 to E&H Pilgrim, who were brewers from Great Chesterford. They didn't keep it long though, because it was sold again in 1913 to Watney, Combe and Reed. After that, the pub passed through a few more brewery hands. In 1919, it was taken over by Benskins of Watford, and then in 1960, it was conveyed to Indcoop. Through all these changes, the thatched roof and old timber frame kept the place looking like something straight out of an old village postcard. It's rightly Grade 2 listed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that house right there, I think, is what you call a proper chocolate box cottage. We really do need Nikki here for this, don't we? I'm sure you guys remember that Nikki likes her chocolate box cottages. That one is certainly within that bracket. And check out the tree at the left there. That's a proper bit of topiary, that as well. Now, if you walk along the front of that from the Plough, you can see there's a gate on this side. That takes you into the church.
Now we come to the church, which is dedicated to St. Augustine of Canterbury. Its beginnings go right back to the 1050s. It started as an Anglo-Saxon foundation, and even though the building has changed over the years, you can still sense how old it is. It's Grade 2 listed. The oldest parts of the church are the nave and the chancel, which were built in the late 11th and early 12th centuries. They were put together using flint, pebble rubble, and bits of Roman brick, which were often reused in old village buildings. In the 1200s, the church was extended both to the east and the west. If you look closely at the walls, you can spot the different materials and ages sitting side by side. Jump forward to the 1880s, and the church went through a major makeover, carried out by Frederick Chancellor, well known across Essex. He repaired worn-out parts, added new details, and made sure the building was strong enough to last. Inside today, one of the most eye-catching features is the woodwork added in the mid-1960s by the Mabbits. The stained glass is another highlight. Powell and Sons made the windows between the 1940s and 1960s, and they were paid for by local benefactors who wanted to brighten the church after the war years. Also, look out for the carving, which is designed to look like Winston Churchill.
So in terms of landmarks, that's pretty much it as far as Birdbrook goes, but there is of course one big thing we haven't covered yet. We'll deal with that in a moment. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you around the rest of the village by going this way and forming a little loop which will include a footpath, and I think it's time for a couple of ASMR sections. Okay, so we have made it all the way around Birdbrook. I'm just making my way back to the community centre, which is where I parked the car. Now, of course, there is one thing we haven't yet discussed, and that's Moynes Park, and its connection, of course, to James Bond. Now, there is a footpath that runs into the Moynes Park estate, but the house at the centre of it is quite a long way away, and I am not about to walk all the way down there. So, I'm going to use the magic of the internet to do this one. So here's Amelia to tell you a little bit more about Moynes Park and the James Bond connection.
Okay, so we've now seen most of, if not all of the village, but there's one thing we haven't yet discussed, and that would be its connection to James Bond. For this, we first have to understand the huge Moynes Park estate to the west of it all. Moynes Park is one of those places that feels larger than life even before you get to the James Bond link. It's a grand Elizabethan mansion built back in 1570 by the Gent family, and it still has those tall chimneys that make Tudor houses look so impressive. Over the years, it passed through different hands, but it has always been one of the standout houses in this part of Essex. By the mid-1900s, it had become the country home of Ivar Bryce, and that's when the Bond connection really took off. Ivar Bryce was a close friend of Ian Fleming, and for those who don't know, Fleming was the man who created the fictional spy 007 himself. Fleming first introduced Bond to the world in 1953's Casino Royale, and the character quickly became one of the most famous fictional spies ever. Fleming spent a lot of time at Moynes Park during the 1950s. It wasn't just a casual visit spot either. It was where he finished writing From Russia with Love in 1957. People love to picture him sitting in one of the old rooms, typing away while looking out over the grounds. The house became a sort of retreat for him, and as many acclaimed writers do, he even mentioned Moynes Park in his work, albeit not always by name. In return, Moynes Park is often mentioned in Bond circles as a key part of the series' background. There's another fun link too. Ivar Bryce's full name was John Felix Charles Bryce, and he is widely believed to have inspired the name of Felix Leiter, Bond's CIA friend. Fleming even mentioned Bryce during the train journey in Dr. No, which feels like a little nod to their friendship. Bryce later wrote a memoir about Fleming in 1975 called You Only Live Once, and I'm sure you can see the connection there. The Moynes Park estate itself has had a long run of owners. After Bryce's wife died in 1992, the house passed to the Mountbatten family. They held it for a while before selling it to the Gardiner family in 2001. Through all these changes, the house kept its Grade 1 listed status and its place as one of the most important old buildings in the area. And important is an understatement. The grounds stretch across 400 acres, which is why it has also been used as a backdrop for Hammer horror films. Put simply, it has plenty of space and plenty of atmosphere. Today, Moynes Park is still a private home and a working stud farm, so you can't just wander inside. However, public footpaths run close enough for you to admire the grounds from a distance on a countryside walk. Even from the outside, you can sense how much history sits behind those tall chimneys, from Tudor builders to Bond manuscripts to film crews. It's quite the place.
Thank you very much, Amelia. You know what? Amelia's like my own secret agent, not 007, AAF. Right, okay, now, we've got one more thing to do before we leave Birdbrook behind, and that is to go to Baythorn End in the car. Right, so finally, we're leaving the parish now through the hamlet of Baythorn End. Even though this is small, it packs in a surprising amount of history. The best known building in the hamlet is Baythorn Hall, built in around 1341 by Sir John de Walton. He was once the High Sheriff of both Essex and Hertfordshire. The hall is also famous for being one of the earliest raised aisle hall houses still standing in the country. Its timber frame is original, and even after all these years it still looks impressive. The Pike family bought the estate in 1640, and George Pike built the current mansion in 1668. It replaced an older manor that once stood opposite the Swan Inn, Baythorn End's pub. The hall is certainly noteworthy, but it's not all this little hamlet can offer. The area also has strong Roman links. A Roman camp was found once near Watson Bridge, and urns and coins have been dug up in the fields around Birdbrook. Baythorn End also ties into a local legend, the life of Martha Blewett. Here's Amelia one final time to tell you about her.
In the church in Birdbrook, you'll see a commemorative plaque to a remarkable former resident of Baythorn End, Martha Blewett. She lived in the 1600s at the Swan Inn, and she became famous for something that would make anyone stop and blink. She was a woman who certainly liked a bit of wedding cake because she was married 9 times. Yes, I'm not making that up. 9. In a small, rural place, that sort of thing didn't go unnoticed, and over time her life turned into a bit of local folklore. Her marriages are the part that everyone remembers. She outlived 8 husbands, one after the other, which must have caused quite a stir in the village. Her 9th husband, according to tradition, was the one who finally outlived her. Martha died on the 7th of May, 1681, and she was buried at the church which had hosted all 9 of her weddings. Her grave is still there in the churchyard, and inside the tower there's that memorial tablet that keeps her name alive. One of the most talked about parts of her life is actually her funeral. Local tradition says that the clergyman chose a line from the Book of Job for her service, which goes, "Last of all, the woman died also." It's a line that fits her life in a slightly cheeky way. Now, if all of this seems rather unbelievable, here's the absolute best bit. What makes Birdbrook even more unusual is that Martha wasn't the only one with a long list of spouses. It also had a man named Robert Hogan, buried nearby, who was married 7 times in succession. It's amazing how, in one small village, you have a woman with 9 husbands and a man with 7 wives. A pair of lives that would make even the most outrageous modern soap opera look tame.
For a tiny village on the Essex-Suffolk border, this one is simply stacked with history. Moynes Park steals the spotlight, of course, with its tall chimneys and its famous guest Ian Fleming, who finished From Russia with Love there in 1957. Back in the centre, St Augustine's Church with its flint walls and Powell & Sons glass, the Plough with its long run of owners, and the thatched community house built on the old school site all add to what makes this one so special. Even the Bowls Club has a surprisingly good backstory. And then, of course, there's Martha Blewett, Birdbrook's unofficial patron saint of marital enthusiasm. Between Martha and Robert Hogan, who clocks up 7 wives of his own, you start to wonder if Birdbrook once had a loyalty card scheme for weddings.
By the old brick walls where the tall trees sway, Moynes Park glints in a bold barn way. Pages turn where the spy once played. Birdbrook hums with the marks he made. There's a spark in the fields where the footpaths wind, a thrill in the tales that the locals find, a hush in the moat where the frost once lay, and a hint of a plot in the light of day. Past the church and the pub with its welcome glow, past the hall where the old beams know, past the pond where the ducks drift slow, this place keeps a pulse with a secret show. There's a spark in the fields where the footpaths wind, a thrill in the tales that the locals find, a hush in the moat where the frost once lay, and a hint of a plot in the light of day. Cross that bridge where the shadows bend, hear the tread of a well-known friend. 007 in the breeze again, as the past leans close like a whispered grin. With its wild-lived tale, Churchill carved in the arch so pale, old names drift on the evening gale, and the barnhouse fire still stirs the trail. There's a spark in the fields where the footpaths wind, a thrill in the tales that the locals find, a hush in the moat where the frost once lay, and a hint of a plot in the light of day. So we walk this patch with a knowing smile, past the house that fed a spy's profile, past the paths that run mile by mile. Birdbrook stands with a bold, bright style.
Hello folks, welcome back to Braintree for round number 5, and the last one you'll see in Essex this year. I hopefully will come back next year at some point. In fact, I am going to come back next year at some point. I do know that. I can say that confidently right now. I've just remembered something. Anyway, where are we in this last episode this week? Well, we're in a village that won't take us very long to walk through. It's basically just one long street with everything of note along it. At the top of said street, there's a pond, which you can see here. We'll catch that. There's also an old school, which is over there. And in this one, we'll also be talking about a pub. We'll be talking about a church and a few other bits and bobs. And then we'll go down to an old airfield, which is now the home of the Essex Gliding Club. This is Ashen. Ashen, Ash Tree Slope. Finally, in this first run of Braintree videos, we come to Ashen, which is the smallest one we've done all week. This sits on the southern side of the River Store, a short hop from Haverhill and Clare, with lanes, fields and listed buildings tucked into a quiet valley setting. Ashen has turned up in records as Ask and S, which both hint at Old English roots linked to ash trees and a wooded slope. Once you start digging into time, Ashen stretches from prehistoric flints and a Roman brooch through its doomsday mention. In the book, it was written as Ass. It was for sure a Saxon settlement before becoming a medieval farming parish. Numbers rose in the 1800s, dipped by 1931, and today sit in the mid-300s based on recent census figures. The River Store really feels like Ashen's defining feature now. The river marks the county boundary, carries the Store Valley path, and pulls walkers along its banks. Stand on the northern edge of the parish and you're looking straight into Suffolk across the water. Ashen also has St Augustine's Church, and with its 12th century fabric and very old bells, it anchors a conservation area. Meanwhile, Claret Hall still stands further afield with its royal link, while the former Ridgewell airfield and its memorials echo wartime stories. Work here has long been tied to the land. In 1801, most men laboured on local farms. Now big arable units need fewer hands growing cereals and other crops typical of the east of England. Many residents commute, but there is an equestrian school that adds a modern rural livelihood. People give this place extra colour. Lionel of Antwerp, the son of Edward III, lived at Claret Hall. Matthew Parker once served as a rector before becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury. It also has links to Samuel Pepys, the Misley MP John Elwes, and Edith Cathedral through her cousin's cottage. There are loads of other stories that this one can tell you. Villagers still talk about the ancient bells and wartime tales from Ridgewell Airfield, including accidents and near misses. More light-hearted is the teddy bear parachute jump from the church tower, now a much-loved annual tradition. Energy is a modern topic. Parish notices have covered proposals for a solar farm at Ridgewell Airfield, while a steady stream of applications for stables, tree works and rooftop panels have also come up of late. The local planning pages are rarely empty for long. So come with me then as we go off to explore Ashen. With the store at our side, the church and Claret Hall up the lane, and the airfield beyond, it feels like a quiet village, but it has plenty going on under the surface.
Amelia's features.
Hello everyone. This is what I've got to do today. Most of my efforts here will centre on the former RAF Ridgewell at the south of Ashen. Andy will tell you about most of the actual village. It's about time he did some work.
Okay, so here we are then at the start point. Like I said, this is just a case of walking from the top of the village to the bottom of the village. Everything of note is on this one main road. Let's get started with this pond. Alright, so because this one is pretty small, we won't be in the actual village for long. That said, there are still a handful of landmarks to see on the street, which is the main road through Ashen. At the northern end of it is the old schoolhouse. Long ago, this was the village school, full of chatter, lessons and muddy boots. Today it's a large private home, and to be honest, that's as much as I got for this one. Ashen has no school these days, so let's move on down the road to the church. You've just seen the old post office there. That's one of the things Ashen's lost over the last few years. It's also lost its pub as well. We'll see where that was in a moment. It's not about to lose its church though. Good job really. It's a nice church this. Not that you can see it, it's there, trust me. It's behind those trees. We'll check that out in a moment. There's a phone box here too. Now let's have a quick look in this because it looks like an empty shell. You never know. Sometimes they can be deceiving. They may have things in. No, it's just an empty one. There's nothing in that one, I'm afraid.
This is St. Augustine of Canterbury's church, which sits in the middle of the village street. The building first appeared in the 1100s, and the one part that survives from that time is the nave, which is the main space where people gather today. This is a church that's kept growing bit by bit. In around 1400, a new west tower was added, and it still stands tall today. In 1520, a brick stair turret was built onto the tower. It looks a little unusual, almost like a small tower stuck onto a bigger one, but it adds a fun twist to the building's shape. The church did not stop changing there. In 1610, a timber-framed south porch was put up, and that is still in place now. A huge change came in 1857, when the original medieval chancel was taken down. In its place, a brand new Gothic revival chancel was built by John Loughborough Pearson. By 1962, the church large enough and historically plentiful enough to be officially recognised for its importance and was listed Grade 1. That's no small honour, of course. It's the highest level of protection for historic buildings in England. Here's a fun fact for you. You remember earlier in the week we spoke a bit about Edith Cavell, the famous wartime nurse? Well, Ashen has a link to her via her cousin Edward, who lived adjacent to this very church.
Look how wonky the roof is on the porch here. You know what? That's not bad craftsmanship. That's what you call character, that. Edith Cavell's cousin wasn't the only well-known person to live here. You know the famous diarist Samuel Pepys? Well, his cousin, Richard, lived in Ashen circa 1660. Richard was the son of Chief Justice Richard Pepys, who settled in Ashen after returning from New England in 1650. Right, let's move on. Ashen has no pub these days, but it used to. Here, you're looking at another listed building, which is the former Red Cow. Now, a pub this may have been, but it actually operated inside a building that's much older, Bishop's Hall. It might not look that old, but this is a house that first appeared in the 1500s. Bishop's Hall is a solid old place full of timber, brick and the sort of details you only get from buildings that have been standing for a very long time. By the 1800s, it had turned into the pub and it closed in 1989. During its years as a pub, the Red Cow was supplied by local breweries including J.C. Malden & Sons, which was well known across northern Essex. As for the Red Cow name, that was like a subliminal message. Apparently, a red cow on a pub sign suggested good drink was on offer inside. Elsewhere on the street we have the Ashen Village Memorial Hall. This was set up as a registered charity in May 1963, and it was built to honour people from the area who lost their lives in the two world wars. The hall has not stayed frozen in time. It's been through some renovations to bring it up to modern standards, and the work made a huge difference. Seasonal dinners like Burns Night and St George's Day are always popular here. Inside, the hall has everything you would expect from a well-run village venue. There's a heated main hall, a proper kitchen for cooking and serving food, and a grassed area at the back that's handy for outdoor activities. There's also plenty of parking. Not far from that hall, there's a small playground and a playing field which together serve as the village's primary outdoor sports centre. It's equipped with a modern enclosed area for young children, football goals, climbing ropes and a zip wire. Okay, so in wandering into this playing field, we've wandered all the way through Ashen from the top to the bottom effectively. But we're not done with this place just yet. You see, the village might be small, but the parish is a lot bigger. And now I'm going to walk back up to the car, we're going to drive through the village again, and we're going to head down towards RAF Ridgewell, which, like I said at the beginning of this video, is now the home of the Essex Gliding Club.
Okay, so Ashen may be a small village, but elsewhere within its boundaries there are some great things we can cover. RAF Ridgewell is, for sure, one of those. Located to the south of the village, this began life in 1941, when farmland near Ashen was taken over and turned into a huge airfield. This is quite a notable old airfield actually, because it was the only Class A heavy bomber base in Essex, so it was a pretty big deal at the time. The place was massive, covering around 500 acres. It had 3 runways crossing over each other, plus hangars, workshops and living quarters. At its busiest, nearly 3,000 people lived and worked here, so Ashen Village in comparison was far smaller. The first group to use the airfield was the RAF's No. 90 Squadron, who arrived in December 1942. They flew short Stirling bombers and were to carry out 51 missions. Their time at Ridgewell was tough, and they lost 28 Stirlings before leaving in May 1943. In June 1943, the USAAF 381st Bomb Group took over, and Ridgewell suddenly became a busy American base. Their crews flew B-17 Flying Fortresses, carrying out nearly 300 combat missions. In all, they dropped more than 22,000 tons of bombs during the war. Life was dangerous, and the group suffered heavy losses, but they also left behind well-known aircraft, such as Rotherhithe's Revenge and Stage Door Canteen, which are still remembered today. After the war ended in Europe, the airfield returned to RAF control and took on a very different job. Instead of launching aircraft, it became a place where unused wartime bombs were stored and dismantled. Eventually, the airfield was no longer needed, and in 1957, it officially closed. There is one type of flying that still takes place here, though. The Essex Gliding Club use the old airfield now, but they didn't always fly from Ashen. For a long time, the club was based at Northweald Airfield, but that became less suitable for what the club wanted to do. The change came in 1991, when the club moved to Ridgewell and turned it into a proper gliding base. Instead of the concrete runways at Northweald, this gave them an all-grass airfield, perfect for gliders. Since moving here, the club has found a thoughtful way to honour the RAF history. One of their gliders is painted in the markings of the 381st Bomb Group and carries the name Century Note. It is a small tribute, but it's a meaningful one, and it reminds everyone that the ground beneath their feet once played a huge part in the war. Essex Gliding Club also shared this site with the Ridgewell Airfield Commemorative Association Museum, which keeps the wartime past alive with displays and artefacts. It's worth a visit too if you're interested in aviation history.
And if you've ever wondered what it's like to go up in a glider, well, I can tell you it's quite the experience. If you search through my videos for my 5,000 subscriber special, which seems like an age ago now, I was actually invited to an airfield to go up in a glider. It was in Lincolnshire. So once you've watched this video, maybe that's another one to recommend, shall we say. Right, let's finish Ashen off. There's not much left. We've just got to drive up a road which will take us over the border into Suffolk again. Now we're to the east of the village, where we find the Ashen Equestrian Centre, a well-known place for riders and horses alike. It was set up in 2005 by a girl known only in my research as Becky, who wanted somewhere calm and supportive for horses and those who love them. At the start it was quite a small setup, but since then it's had a few additions, including some holiday cottages on the site. Named Saddlers and Mac Shack, they were created from old saddleries and stables, turning them into cosy places for people to stay with their horses. The facilities at the centre have also improved bit by bit. The arena became one of the standout features. It's a 60 by 20 metre space built with a special mix of silica sand and hydrogel, designed to feel soft underfoot while still being strong enough for serious training. Just up the road from that equestrian centre is Ashen Hall. This building began life as a medieval farmhouse long before it ever looked like the smart home you see today. Because of its long past and interesting mix of styles, Ashen Hall was listed as Grade 2 in 1962. The hall has been home to some notable families over the years. In the 1600s it belonged to Sir John Tallackern. His daughter Elizabeth later married Sir Robert Bernard. Their son, also named John Bernard, became a well-known politician and a baronet. By the 1800s, the house had new owners again. This time it was the home of Rear Admiral George Hills, who had a long naval career that began in 1792. Hills's son, George Hills Jr., was arguably just as famous as his dad. He served as the first Bishop of British Columbia.
And finally, before we bring this one to a close, we have to talk about another hall. This is Claret Hall, which has a past that stretches back far further than the house you see today. The site this stands on was mentioned in the Domesday Book almost 1,000 years ago. Back then, it was known simply as Claret, but it was sometimes called Little Clare, and it was part of a small medieval settlement. For a long time, the estate was tied to the de Clare family, one of the most powerful families in medieval England. They held huge estates and titles, including the Earls of Gloucester and Hertford. Via Claret Hall, Ashen has a royal link, because King Edward III's third son, Lionel, once lived in it. In the 1700s, the estate took a very different turn when it passed to the MP John Elwes. Elwes was known across the country for his extreme penny pinching. Even though he inherited huge amounts of land and money, he refused to spend anything on repairs. Claret Hall was one of the places linked to his unusual lifestyle.
For a place this small, Ashen has a surprising cast list. Samuel Pepys's cousin lived here, Edith Cavell's cousin lived beside the church, and the miserly old MP John Elwes once owned Claret Hall. It feels like a quiet village at first glance, but there's far more going on under the surface.
Ashen fields keep footsteps tracing river bends. Ashen fields keep sunlight drifting over grain. Ashen fields keep voices carry through the green. Ashen fields keep names remembered in the soil. Lined with time. Bright days fall on tracks once smoothed by years. Clear views stretch far across the open ground. Ashen fields keep echoes of wheels on old tracks. keep work days marked by turning earth. Ashen fields keep faces linked with claret hall. Ashen fields keep tales left by wartime crews. White skies roll over paths that cross the veil. Warm winds move through hedges lined with time. Bright days fall on tracks once smoothed by years. Clear views stretch far across the open ground. River light drifts past the edge of every field. Morning air lifts hopes across the rolling rise. White skies roll over paths that cross the veil. Warm winds move through hedges lined with time. Bright days fall on tracks once smoothed by years. Clear views stretch far across the open ground. Ashen has stories and tales galore. Ashen fields keep me coming back for more.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.